Well guys, we have some more updates from the front lines and more news today. Let's start from the Pokrovsk direction. This is the Pokrovsk town on the top right corner of your screen, and you know what? Russia think that they concentrated enough forces to try to push Ukrainian army out from this newly created bridgeheads, which happened as the result of the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation in the Pokrovsk direction. So before, Ukrainian army was really successful, but for the last couple of days Russia wants to push Ukraine out, and partially they're successful, but in very tiny places. Like for example, in this area they moved towards Uspenivka, and here today they crossed this small road taking just a few meters of the ground, and before, like 3 days ago, Ukrainian army was successful there. Russia wants to protect two of those places which are under the risk of being encircled by Ukrainian army, so especially this one where Russia has more of the troops plus the vehicles and other resources, so they send lots and lots of the new reinforcements to this particular area. Well, nevertheless, as you can see, Ukraine has multiple of the attempts to get more ground, especially in Peshchana, Shevchenka. Yeah, recently Ukraine was successful there as well. The settlement is not fully under Ukrainian control, but it has all of the prospects to go for it. And here is the very important road which leads to this very important crossroad, so potentially Ukraine might disturb the Russian supplies even with the ground forces. For now, this job is mostly done by the FPV drones, which are very effective against the Russian supplies, especially because they're unarmored, so they have no armored vehicles for those supplies. Usually those are Ural trucks or Bukhanka vans, or maybe other civilian vehicles. So most of the Russian supply losses are happening on the way to reach their positions. That's why they're in lack of the resources, in lack of the supplies. Shoigu, Gerasimov, where's the munition for the Russian army? Well, it's hard to get it there. So despite two of those Russian attack or counterattack vectors, we may call them, Ukraine is really successful in Pokrovsk, and I expect that Ukraine will keep the initiative. Alright, the weather in Ukraine is changing from warm to cold and from cold to warm very fast, and then it is warm. Russia is using lots of their motorcycles, for example, like in this video. Yes, again they switched to the motorcycles, and probably those are provided to Russia by China, because definitely those are not the Harley Davidsons, Honda or Yamaha. No, those are China-made Lifan, Kivei motorcycles, so those kind of the producers which you may not even know, but they're very massive in China, and they just sent lots of the motorcycles to Russia, as they did with the China golf cars. So here they go like those crazy easy riders. Yeah, actually those are not superb off-road bikes, but they have some of the off-road capabilities and they're very light. That's their advantage, and also they may reach Ukrainian positions really fast. And the bike itself is smaller, so our drone operators should act very fast and very precisely. The good thing here that they don't have armor at all. Maybe just some armor vest and the helmet, that's it. Well, the full videos again I'll publish on my Telegram channel. Here there is the crazy Ghost Rider turned into... Oh, Russia sent armored vehicles behind those motorcycles. Interesting. Like the convoys of the Russian vehicles even, I think that's the compilation of the videos which were filmed by a particular brigade recently. Oh, actually no, it's not the compilation. Those were two-way facades, minus 20 armored vehicles for Russia and minus 41 motorcycles. Russians tried to break near Volne Pole and Novosilka, but soldiers of the Ukrainian 31st Mech Brigade stopped them, mostly with drones and artillery, and the support was from the 3rd Mechanized Battalion Presidential Brigade. That's great. But again, my friends, I may show you this video on my other platform, so you may check out my other social media in the video description just below. I usually post that stuff on Rumble and on my Telegram, obviously. On Telegram in general, I post the most recent news, and also sometimes I post on X. I will put me down a little for you to see this convoy. That's crazy, lots of the armored vehicles indeed. So Russia follows the same trap they create for themselves. They advance with the huge military convoys, with motorcycles, with armored vehicles, which is pretty much the good target for the FPV drones. Sometimes they may land some of the infantry forces in the local tree lines, but usually with the drone drops they are just annihilated. But Russia may scroll with these tactics little by little, but with absolutely heavy losses. Yeah, hello my friends and welcome. My name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. Let's go. Yeah, I forgot to turn on the light. Here we have everything. And just for you to show the direction of this crazy Russian attack, so they tried to advance towards Novosilka, so it's partially not under the Russian control, even though it is in a gray area. And they also tried to go to Vilne Pole, so it is Donetsk Oblast, but the southern part of it. You may say that it was one of the directions of the Ukrainian counteroffensive operations back in 2023, and Russia is still unable to regain the territories which they lost that time. Well, I would say it's the new direction of the Russian attack, because before they took Velika Novosilka under control, they tried to offense northbound towards Vesela, but it wasn't really a successful operation for them because there is the natural obstacle, basically the river, so they try to expand sideways using enormous forces, and they have enormous losses at the same time. And actually, guys, for me it's kind of strange. Why not to concentrate enough forces, for example, in Taurus direction or in Pokrovsk direction? Why to disperse their own forces elsewhere? Well, I guess it's the logic of the Russian commanders. Maybe they want to have their own local rewards, and they have commanders for each part of the front lines, and coordinative actions between the Russian military, well, it is still weak. Without like prompt command from the highest chief Gerasimov, they try to do their own local job. Those stories are well known among Russians that were sent to the stupid mid-wave attacks just for generals to show that they've occupied small towns or villages. And sometimes, like it happened for example in the Taurus direction, Russia occupied nearby villages and almost full Taurus, report about it, and generals got their rewards and promotions, but Ukrainian army started the counteroffensive operation, pushing the Russians away from many of the quarters of the town. So the motivation of the Russian military command, well, I would say it is understandable. And also they want to present just good information for their chiefs. They're hiding the losses and they want to reach their local goals no matter what. So that's why they use all of the means, like even crutches, battalions are out there, which is crazy. And yes, we have the detailed explanation of that assault from the deep state military map source. They say that there was initially one convoy, but it was split in two of the directions, one towards Novosilka and the other one to Vilne Pole. They say that actually this assault operation was planned for today, but Russians did it yesterday. Moreover, Ukraine was also preparing for this particular Russian assault because, you know, Ukraine also has intelligence in the Russian army. But there was the Russian general who arrived to the local Russian command center of this group, and he commanded to start the operation yesterday instead of today. He ordered the massive strike of artillery, and definitely Russian artillery worked at first, and later on the Russian convoys went ahead all of the forces which they were able to accumulate. It's basically the standard Russian tactics which they used during the Second World War, and which is absolutely not working nowadays with all of those drone surveillance. So Ukraine knew about this strike, which just happened one day before, but yeah, the result of the strike of this Russian assault is fantastic for us, actually. By the way, my friends, if you want to support the job that I do here on YouTube almost daily, you're very welcome to join me on Patreon. I'll put the link for my Patreon page right in the video description below. Thank you so much for supporting my motivation. Especially right now that I have some issues with monetization, you just keep me running. If Russians do not have the China-made motorcycles, they use the Soviet-made. This is the Russian Ural with the sidecar, and they load it to send to the front lines. Well, actually, I also had a couple of those sidecar motorcycles, and I sent those to the front lines as well. Well, not actually to the front lines, but to Ukrainian military. They operate those behind the front lines for supplies and, you know, just to go to the local shop to buy something, to carry water, goods, light munition. But Russians, sometimes they're active on the front lines with those, which is absolute craziness. Well, guys, for the first time Russia lost Kokcan, North Korean provided artillery systems. It's the huge move for Ukrainian defenders, and as you can see, Russia doesn't hesitate to use those systems within the range of the Ukrainian FPV drones, and it is less than 20 kilometers away from the front lines, so I wonder about the range of the system. Well, the caliber of the system is 2010 or 2005 millimeter, and it has kind of the long range, one of the longest range artillery systems they have, and somehow Ukraine was able to hit it with FPV. Nice, absolutely great job here, and it's not the first time happening, by the way. I guess it was the Russian convoy or the artillery system was towed somewhere, and yeah, the rest of the vehicles were also zeroed. Alright, here we go with the Ukrainian Air Force. They continue to zero Russian positions. For example, this is happening in Kursk region of Totkino village, and Russians tried to repel Ukrainian forces out there. They assembled some of the hub center for their supplies, which was hit by JDAM or French-made HARM ISM guided bomb, which are also fantastic. For those kind of the missions, Ukraine uses MiG-29 fighter jets or Sukhoi-27. Well, sometimes I get the questions why I do not show the losses for Ukrainian side on the battlefield. Well, after all, Ukraine doesn't attack with those huge convoys. That's the feature of the Russian army still. But definitely Ukraine has losses behind the front lines. For example, this is the Archer artillery system. Unfortunately, Ukraine lost it. How it happened? Well, Russia used the Lancet drone, which hit this system. We see the fire, so probably the system is gone or at least severely damaged. So it is no-go, maybe forever. Or maybe if evacuated, Ukraine may restore the components of the system. It happens like almost every day. Then Russians fly with their drones behind the front lines. They have really sophisticated Lancet drones. Ukraine still doesn't have that tool, and Russia has its own advantage in ballistic missiles, in cruise missiles, in those drones. But Ukraine has advantages in other areas. And still Russia has way more losses compared to Ukraine because of their mainly stupid actions on the front lines. Plus they never learn, even if their own military bloggers are telling that this strategy is very stupid to use lots of the forces in a single attack on the front lines, but Russians just continue it. It's good for us. And by the way, did you know that we have some of the good news from Deutschland? So Merz, the new chancellor of Germany, he will be the new chancellor, he is oriented to supply those Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. Ukraine was waiting for those for lots of the time, for 2 or even 3 years. And finally, there is the leader in Germany who said that, okay, I will put my signature for this document if it is voted in Bundestag. EU Foreign Chief Kaja Kallas also supported this initiative, as well as the representatives from Netherlands, Poland, and EU foreign policy. Yeah, it is here. I think that there will be more countries who support that as well. Well, not just by encouraging Germany to give this approval, but also by providing logistics to Ukraine. For example, if Poland backs that initiative and Poland is bordering Ukraine, it means that they might have some of the resources to transport those missiles to Ukraine. And yeah, I guess Ukraine might use F-16s for those missions with Taurus, but not only. Ukraine also has Sukhoi-24 tactical bombers. They also equipped with the special adapters for those Western-made cruise missiles, and not only. By the way, those adapters were designed by French engineers in the record terms, like in 2 weeks or something, and still they're in operation. Alright, the situation in Lyman direction, this is the Lyman town. Here Russia has the advantage, unfortunately, over Ukrainian army, and Ukraine is unable to cope with this offensive of the Russian army yet. Yeah, maybe Ukrainian forces are too much dispersed, and Russia has actually more of the resources compared to Ukrainian side. In general, Ukraine operates roughly 250,000 soldiers, which are being deployed on the battlefields. The rest of the Ukrainian army is used for supplies, for operation of this huge mechanism of the army. The Russian army is actually bigger, it's 1.3 million, and half of that army is out there in Ukraine. So yeah, that's why for Ukraine, with lack of the supplies, it's very hard to repel those Russian attacks elsewhere. Like Ukraine did it successfully in Pokrovsk direction because Pokrovsk town is very important, but here, no, not enough resources, and that's why Russia took, for example, the part of Yampolivka today. And partially Ukraine withdrew the forces, so I expect that Russia may take all of this land up to those kind of the lakes. But again, it's the natural obstacle, so Russia will not go over here. However, they may advance to Zarichne, simultaneously also to Kolodeze, and their goal is Lyman over here. And from Lyman they might try to go to Slavansk, but again, for this advancement, Russian army will lose lots and lots of their resources as well. And we understand that with the current pace of their losses, they cannot continue like that for extensive period of time. They need to do something with their army, to modernize it, to announce a new mobilization, because if everything was perfect out there, we wouldn't see those images with the Russian crutches battalions. The commentator here says that they're not coming back from the front lines, they're going to the front lines from the hospitals. So this guy with 2 sticks, that guy with a stick, It is crazy. In a human history, no army threatened their own soldiers as badly as Putin threats Russians. It is crazy, guys. Absolute madness. And the fact that the Russian society is okay with it, guys, it is just beyond understanding. But people in Russia massively went on the streets, not protesting against the Russian regime or how the Russian regime behaves with their own army and with themselves. No, they went to the streets just because their favorite rapper is gone. I'm speaking about Pasha Technic, who died in Thailand, as far as I remember. He was sick with something, but here I want to show you the idea that Russians actually may go to the streets for their own reason. This reason was Pasha Technic, not the war in Ukraine. And this huge meeting wasn't organized, it was planned as the small local funeral ceremony with just relatives and some of the friends, so Russian police actually was shocked when they saw that amount of people. And they couldn't do anything with them, the roads were paralyzed, and yeah, the Russians went on the funeral meeting instead of going and fighting actually for their own future. No, they will continue just to die in Ukrainian war. So the priorities of the Russian society, well, those are really strange. Alright, now let's continue with the front lines review. Here Russia advanced a little towards Ketlerivka. Ukrainian defense is still kind of strong there because Russia took few meters of the ground. But yeah, this village is the last one to reach the border with Dnipropetrovsk region. It is clear that Russia is using more resources for this sort of the advancement to reach Dnipropetrovsk because they want maybe to occupy one more region of Ukraine in the future perspective. Yeah, like 2 days ago I spoke about the big Russian advancements all across the front lines, but it only might happen if Ukraine stays without the military support. But it looks like our European colleagues and partners, they are pretty much determined to support the Ukrainian military. Unlike United States, and we have not a good signals coming from Donald Trump himself, and we're gonna speak about that idiot later in this video. So yeah, two of the vectors of the Russian strikes, one from Preobrazhenka and one towards Ketlerivka, but still it is not really that effective compared to what it was several months ago. And remember how Russia started their offensive in Zaporizhia towards Stepove and to this village? Well, this offensive stalled for them completely. They went to the Malysherbaki, very small village, but were stopped by Ukrainian defenders, that's it. And I don't see really a huge perspective for the Russian army in Zaporizhia direction because here Ukraine built significant defense lines. And Ukraine also disturbs the Russian supplies during the night time using Baba Yaga drone. It's the hexacopter, kind of the big one, which drops several of the mortar mines, and it is very effective even against some of the Russian bunkers. The wooden build, obviously, not the concrete. And here you may see what happened to the Russian vehicle. It was carrying some of the supplies. But yeah, the most of the losses Russia has among Bukhanka vents, and they restarted the production massively again. There was the period when the Russian army hadn't enough Bukhankas, but it looks like they have more of those because I obtain tons of those images every day. Alright, Zelensky asked the United States of America to sell 10 of the Patriot systems. We know that America has many more of those, so 10 Patriot systems is not a problem, especially when they are needed for serious defense of the ally, and Ukraine is the ally of the United States of America. Well, maybe Donald Trump doesn't think so, but in fact it is. Well, even with the previous White House administration, it was agreed that Ukraine will obtain more of the Patriots. The agreement was reached the last year, but Ukraine hasn't obtained those Patriots. So Zelensky says that Ukraine is willing to spend its own $15 billion, which actually could be spent for the other military stuff, but Ukraine absolutely crucially needs those Patriot systems, because we all know what happened in Sumy yesterday. And the Patriot system is the one which is capable to shut down those ballistic missiles. You know, the excuse of Donald Trump was always like, we spend a lot for Ukraine, you know, those taxpayers' money. So now Ukraine proposes, give us Patriots as exchange for our money. We're gonna purchase those. And you know what? Donald Trump is silent. Moreover, he is again accusing Ukraine for the start of the war, together with Joe Biden. Here's the most recent post of that idiot by the time I'm recording this video. And yes, I'm gonna call Trump different names because he deserves that. The war between Russia and Ukraine is Biden's war, not mine. I just got here. Yeah, it's not my fault. And for 4 years during my term, had no problem in preventing it from happening. He's totally delusional because the war has been started since 2014, and by the time Donald Trump was the president, there actually was shooting between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian backed separatists and Russians actually masking as those separatists. So there was the war, not that huge full-scale war, but it was. President Putin and everyone else respected your president. Yeah, we see how Putin really respects Donald Trump now, with those bullshit stories of how they shut down their own drones, but later on they intensified the strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure. Yeah, Trump, believe Putin, believe. And then Trump screams like a child with no candy. I had nothing to do with this war, but I'm working diligently to get the death and destruction to stop. Yeah, we see how he works. Actually, destructions intensified, at least if we speak about Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. And by the way, guys, today Sumy was attacked again with Shahid drones. It is crazy. If the 2020 presidential elections was not rigged, he again didn't believe and he doesn't accept his defeat in 2020. It's crazy, guys. And it was, in so many ways, that horrible war would never have happened. Yeah, he again stated the same bullshit in every of his statement. If I were president, blah blah blah. And after it, he accuses the Ukrainian leader and Joe Biden. President Zelensky and corrupt Joe Biden did an absolutely horrible job in allowing this travesty to begin. So again, he blames Ukraine in general because President Zelensky represents all of the Ukraine now, especially during the wartime. So in a way, he compared and connected Zelensky to Joe Biden. So it is understandable that we'll never ever have the support from this idiot, my friends, unfortunately. This dumb buffoon does everything in Russian favor. Moreover, he's not doing anything good for United States of America with all of that tariff policy. And yeah, he's basically incompetent idiot, which you guys from United States with majority of the votes elected, unfortunately, the last year. And now we all have to deal with this idiot. There were so many ways of preventing it, so the war from ever starting. Yeah, just give Ukraine to Russia, put the puppet government in Ukraine, pro-Russian one, and there will be no war. But Ukraine would be occupied by Russia, so why not to do it with every country in the world? There will be no wars, there will be Russia in general, all across the globe. That's the good policy, isn't it, Donald Trump? But that's the past, now we have to get it to stop and fast. So sad. So sad, Donald Trump, that you are just total idiot. And the real nature of why Donald Trump went so angry with Zelensky was that Zelensky gave the interview to American CBS agency to 60 Minutes program, where Zelensky told the actual truth of what is happening, and under Donald Trump, Ukraine receives absolutely no support, no new military support, that just old military packages are still working but they're not forever out there, and that American officials are literally following the Russian propaganda. And you know, Donald Trump later on confirmed it with his own post, blaming Zelensky for starting this war, and Joe Biden, obviously. So yeah, Donald Trump listens to the guys like Tucker Carlson, and he is not far from Tucker Carlson himself. And here's the big post of Donald Trump. I'm not gonna read all of that shit. So CBS fake news, he said, 60 Minutes program, and he was disappointed about this weekend broadcast, tops them all. He said he's very angry on own American news, and he wants the Federal Communication Commission to revoke the license of CBS. Yeah, usual dictator, guys. It's the usual idiot dictator. Even that bloody dictator Putin is way more competent than Donald Trump. He is way smarter, and that's why Putin is so dangerous. But Trump is dangerous because he knows absolutely nothing. He's incompetent, he's idiot, and with his stupid uncalculated actions he might ruin everything, even his own country. And you know, in his interview, Zelensky also stated that Donald Trump trusts not Ukraine but Putin, and Zelensky is right 100%. And let's, by the way, watch the reaction of Donald Trump on the yesterday's strike on Sumy, because he was asked the question by one of the journalists on Air Force, as usual on his Air Force One flight.
Reaction to Russia's Palm Sunday attack on Ukraine?
I think it was terrible, and I was told they made a mistake, but I think it's a horrible thing. I think the whole war is a horrible thing. I think the war is, for that war to have started, is an abuse of power. This country would have never allowed that war to have started if I were president. That war is a shame. millions of people.
This guy still has no plan, and he stated that Russia did mistake. Freaking mistake, yeah. Guys, it wasn't really a mistake, it was a deliberate strike by 2 of the ballistic missiles to the very populated area of the central part of the Sumy city. And yes, now we know that there were 2 of the missiles, one hit the Congress Center. Some say that there were some of the Ukrainian soldiers inside, some say not, but every of the source confirms that there were no losses among Ukrainian military. And the other missile, well, it hit just the open area with many people on the streets. So there was the public transport, there were people walking and driving. For this hour, 35 of people lost their lives because of this Russian mistake. Yeah, 2 weeks ago it was the Russian mistake, then they hit the Kryvyi city, also causing civilian losses. 3 months ago they shut down the commercial airliner of Azerbaijani airline. You might remember the same stuff with MH17, and Russia started the war probably also by mistake. So many mistakes for Russia, don't you think so? It tells me only one thing, that Donald Trump is the total delusional dumbhead person. And it's very sad that we have him as a president of the biggest economy and military power in the world, because he might ruin everything of that. The Telegraph published the article that Trump isn't ending the war in Ukraine, he is prolonging it. Yes, he encourages Putin to act as he acts. Putin is no longer in isolation, and American side is speaking even about lifting sanctions from Russia. You understand that a couple of days ago Donald Trump signed the extension of the Joe Biden sanctions applied on Russia, but he did it very silently. You know, usually that Donald Trump signs something, he calls all of the journalists to the White House, and here nothing. He is very silent. But here is Russia, an aggressor country which prolongs the war, and Trump extended those sanctions, not even telling about those. The document was just published out there, that is how we know. But you know, it's not a big deal for Donald Trump to cancel his own decree in a matter of seconds. Yeah, for now the sanctions have been extended, but they're looking for cooperation, and we see it openly. If Trump hadn't extended those sanctions, it would look like he is really pro-Russian, at least at this moment. But believe me, he wants to cancel those, and Ukraine Zelensky, you know, those are just very annoying obstacles on the way. And yeah, Donald Trump doesn't care if Ukraine got bombed, if Ukrainian civilians are suffering. He supports Russia in this conflict. It is already understandable, and he blames Ukraine and crooked Joe Biden for everything. And guys, I don't know what it could be for this attitude to change from Donald Trump towards Ukraine. I think it's not possible after all. Alright my friends, and now please don't forget to press your huge like to this video. By doing so you help me a lot, and as usual I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.